All right, guys, what's going on? Caesar the Physio here. We've been focusing a lot on posture, a very static thing. Today we're going to focus on the squat. So I'm excited because of that, one of my favorite movements. And we also have one of my favorite people here, Justin Santos. He's a great coach, very talented athlete as well. He's going to be taking us through what he looks for in a good squat.
Bring him out, Justin Santos. Here he goes.
So we got Justin Santos here, a great coach at the academy. He can probably squat more than me and Joshua here together. He's going to take us through what he looks for in a good squat and talk to us a little bit about the sport that he's in, Olympic lifting, and how it can translate into other sports.
Okay, so one of the first things I like to think about is stance. So I'd like to get him to get his feet a little bit wider than hip, but not quite wider than shoulder. So more or less this setup here. From there, I'm going to make sure that his toes are starting facing forward. If there's immobility, like his ankles aren't quite comfortable in that stance, then we can think about turning the toes out. For now, we're just going to leave him like that. The next thing I'm going to get Caesar to do is start the squat at the hip rather than the knee. So if he turns sideways a little bit, before he starts to bend his knee, I'm going to make sure that the hip moves backward towards me. Go ahead. That's him setting the angle of his hip. Once the angle has been set, he can start bending his knees and dropping into the squat. And then coming back up without this angle at the hip changing. An example of the change would be like so. So he hits the bottom of his squat. As he comes up, that angle of the hip starts to shift. And you can imagine if he had a heavy bar on his back, that would be a lot of trouble. So that would be an issue that we may need to address. You can come up. Before putting an external load on top of his back.
Yeah, hold it.
So Justin, thank you for taking us through the squat and talking to us about Olympic lifting. One thing you mentioned was keeping the weight in the center of your foot. Yep. And I personally really like that because a lot of the cues, at least growing up, that I would hear was always keep the weight on the heels. But what you're saying is not going to one extreme or the other. And just to elaborate on that, I think one reason why it's so important is having the weight through the center of your feet allows you to just create that tension. So you mentioned toes pointing forward, weight in the center of the feet. It allows me to keep my arch up, like you said. If I kept the weight on, let's say, my heel, I would just very slowly start to lose that tension. And the reason why that's so important, we talked a little bit about knee pain, right? We want the knees to track well. We do not want them shooting in. So remember, weight through the center of the feet, create that tension, keep the knees out on top of everything else that we talked about. One question I get a lot at the clinic is about Olympic lifting shoes.
Yep.
So people ask me, should I wear them? Why should or why shouldn't I wear them?
Yeah.
So what's your take on that?
I definitely feel like it is part of the sport. If you wanted to perform it at a specific level, you're going to almost need the shoe. It is very much so like a soccer cleat. You could play soccer without a soccer cleat 100%, but you're on turf against a bunch of other people who have cleats. You're going to need cleats. Otherwise, you're just going to get outperformed every single play. In regards to just being functional and from like a healthy living standpoint, if your plan is not to lift hundreds of pounds and you just want to do Olympic lifting as a hobby to stay mobile, to stay kind of fit, the shoes aren't necessarily needed in that kind of scenario. But if you plan on doing them at any sort of high intensity in a competitive kind of setting where the numbers kind of matter to you a little bit more, the shoes are a must.
What would you tell someone who's worried about like hurting their knees when it comes to squatting?
Yeah, so with things like that, I just focus on the angles. If the angles are right, the pressure should be distributed well. Also focusing on where the weight is shifting in your shoe. If you're too far to the heel or too far to the toe, basically an extreme side of either foot, you're going to see leakage, like the weight on your back is going to go into joints that it might not necessarily need to go into. Staying in the middle of your foot, almost like the arch of your shoe, and not letting that arch collapse inside the shoe will help keep the pressure on your back or front in the right spots within your body.
Justin, if anybody wants to train with you,
yeah,
then when might be a good opportunity?
I'm always here at Academy Alliance. You can pop in at any time. Front desk knows me. I'm usually here almost all the time. So if you come in, say, hey, look for me, I'll be here.
Do classes and privates?
Yes, sir.
Next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about the faults specifically. We kind of touched on them a bit. We'll be more specific about it next week, and then we'll talk about what you can do with the faults and how to correct them.
Thanks, guys. No worries.
Thank you, man.
Easy, easy. Hold that. Yeah. It's all down day, buddy.